do this morning is just kind of sketch some of the broad outlines and some of the background issues that influence the way I read this. So I may get a little wonky. I hope I don't get too wonky. This happens to be kind of one of the areas that I've been doing a fair amount of papers and publication. And so it's real easy to scholarly. So back me up when I do. But one of the things that we really need to do is to take a look at this travel narrative and note its distinctiveness, especially with regards to other gospels in the synoptic tradition. When I say synoptic, just to be sure, I'm talking about Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are all remarkably similar in their materials. Now let's see, I can do share screening, right? So you know, part of the of this situation. Well, first let's take a look at an important part. That is the prologue to Luke, just to kind of set the scene.
Okay. All right, I just muted Mark on accident. Sorry. Okay, Mark,
Right.
Try to share screen. I may have to change the settings.
Okay, let me. I'll
Okay,
I'll
wait.
try
I think I just did it. Okay, see if you can do it.
Okay, hang on just a second. What I need to do is let me get something up that I can, you know, I hadn't done that yet.
While we're waiting, I'll show you my mug that I bought in Jerusalem.
Whoa.
Roll Tide.
Alabama, Alabama in Arabic and Hebrew.
Wow.
Wow.
All right.
Okay.
You've got four
Okay, back
languages.
to you, Mark.
Okay, let me see if
English,
this.
Alabama.
Mary, is a document showing up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Oh, thanks,
But so I'll just leave that up right now. But let's take a look at the prologue to Luke. And if somebody would read that prologue, it's the first four verses of Luke. I'd appreciate.
I'll read it.
Okay.
Since many have undertaken to set down an orderly account of the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed on to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, I too decided, after investigating everything carefully from the very first, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the truth concerning the things about which you have been instructed.
Good. Now, one of the really remarkable things about Luke, by the way, is the only gospel who really tells us what he's doing in his process of writing. And it's pretty obvious that Luke himself is, like really almost all the gospels, with possibly the exception of John, doesn't claim to be an eyewitness, but rather here he's acknowledging that already there are other gospels that are out there that he's using as at least part of his investigation. It says here that others have already compiled a narrative that I think, Tom, your translation said something a little bit different, but the term here is diegesis. It's a narrative, which really suggests documents like Matthew and Mark, which are narrative accounts of the life of Jesus. And so it's a little bit based upon this that we kind of recognize that Luke stands at the end of a number of other, or at the posterior relationships of a number of other gospel accounts. And so just briefly, I just thought I'd put up here, there's two for most of us who are studying this, there's two basic approaches to how we understand Luke's relationship to these other gospels. One is the kind of the dominant thesis, which is the first one here, that is that Mark was the first gospel, and that there was another document of some kind called Q, which influenced then both Matthew and Luke. So here at least Luke is dependent upon Mark and this thing called Q. Q is a hypothetical gospel or a hypothetical document that is based upon similar materials in Matthew and Luke. The other theory, and the one which I actually am more convinced of, is the Farrer theory, which actually has Mark and Matthew both influencing Luke. Either way, Luke is clearly dependent upon Mark, and either some other document of similar materials to what in Matthew, or is dependent upon Matthew itself. Based upon my reading of this prologue, where it says many have undertaken to compile a narrative, I would suggest that it seems more likely that we're dealing both Mark and Matthew existed before Luke did. So anyway, so part of the background here that I'm always going to be using as kind of a benchmark is looking at Mark, and it becomes pretty apparent that Mark is the basis for an awful lot of Luke. So I'm going to do this another one. Let's see if I can find, let's see, hang on, I need to manipulate my, okay, there we go. I'm going to share another document now. And, all right. We can get it to share. Let me go back here again. Pull this up. I have some hard time with the, oh, there we go. Okay. Now, do y'all see that?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
No. Okay. Now, what I've done here is that I have the kind of the order of events over here in Mark on the left, and I'm only going as far as from where Mark starts to ultimately, let me kind of shift down to the Passion narrative begins in chapter 12 in Mark. Okay, at that point, all the Gospels get real similar with the Passion narrative. But let me kind of walk through here. So on the left, we have these events. And if you start noticing on the right, you'll see that in almost every case, the events are in almost exactly in the same order, with a few exceptions. And I'll talk about those exceptions in a second. But when we go through kind of the same order all the way through here, that it becomes pretty apparent that Luke is using as his base the Gospel of Mark as his order. Now there are some variations. For instance, when we get up here, Luke has a birth narrative that Mark doesn't have, and just after the baptism, he inserts a genealogy that is not in Mark. When we get to the call of the disciples, Luke does something different. He actually has the call of the disciples after the teaching in Capernaum and after the sermon in Nazareth, which is different than Mark. Mark just has the ministry and goes directly to the call of the disciples, and the sermon in Nazareth is actually quite a bit later in Mark's gospel. And there's some reasons why we could explore about that, but that's outside of the travel narratives, so we won't talk about that much today. Luke also inserts a big hunk of unique material here in chapter 6 and 8. He has a sermon on the plain. He has the centurion of Capernaum, widow's son at Nain. All of these are kind of the woman with the ointment, the anointing of Jesus in that setting in 736. So all of that is kind of unique to Luke, which he inserts as kind of a small insertion right here. And the rest of this is, there's some little reorderings and such out here. And some of the material in Mark's now that I've marked with yellow, we will find it in the travel narrative. Travel narrative is TN. But overall, the large bulk of Luke is simply following Mark very carefully. Until you get to, so let me just kind of move down here, until we get to this red line right here. So narrative continues along until about 10:2 to 12. Notice that we've had here in Mark, we've had the first passion prediction after Peter confesses Jesus. That's here in Luke. We've had the transfiguration and a second passion prediction, and the same order here in Luke. And then we get here to this point at 10:2 to 12, and Luke at this point does a major departure, and that is at 9:51 all the way to chapter 18. Notice the big jump here. Let me see if I can see if I have any tools for marking. Just a second, I'm going to see. Yeah, I can't find it. But maybe you can see here at from 9:51 to 18:15. Notice all of a sudden Luke jumps first a whole bunch of material, and then at 18:15 he rejoins the Markan narrative, and from here on we're back to the same Markan order. And it gets even more apparent when we get to the passion narrative that they're essentially following the same materials. And so this travel narrative here, which is a third of the gospel, literally 9 chapters out of 24 chapters in Luke, is we've now just kind of left the Markan order. I mean, Luke has always been doing a little bit of variations up here, but they're relatively, for the most part, move some stuff into the travel narrative. He order around. He has this one insertion here, but right here, this is what I want to focus on, because it's this major component in the Gospel of Luke, and it's one that is so unique and so distinctive for the Gospel. So one of the things that I'm hoping to explore with you is, first of all, just what's in this travel narrative. How does Luke about putting this material in here? What's in there? And then ask questions about, does this suggest something about Luke is trying to communicate features about Jesus? All right. So let me now turn to one more document. Let me pull it up here first. And that is, at this point, I got it. Oh, I had it. Yeah, there, right here. All right, y'all see that now?
Not yet.
Yes.
Okay. So this now is a listing of all of the narrative events, kind of one after another, these kind of series of units that's in Luke's travel narrative. And we just kind of might want to walk through a little bit of, first of all, what I've done here. So I've listed the verse structure over here on the left. I can make this available to send out to everybody, along with that other document, just to have, if you want to have on hand. Over here on the right, notice that I've tried to find where there may be parallels in other gospels. And so we have a few that are kind of Markan. Notice these highlighted blue ones. And oftentimes those Markan parallels are relatively slight. Remember on that former list that I had, I showed actually a number of items where things have been moved into the travel narrative. And so here's some of them. Some of them are kind of modest echoes or seem Markan, or maybe they're not entirely sure. Where there are parallels, oftentimes we're going to find more parallels with Matthew. And a lot of these parallels with Matthew are what is oftentimes comes from this Q document. That is material that only Matthew and Luke have in common, and which Matthew often has put in different locations in their material. So as we kind of move down through here, we start at the very beginning at 951 with something that's kind of similar to Matthew and Mark. That is, Matthew and Mark, he kind of starts moseying down to Jerusalem, but it's not real clear. And in fact, we might want to turn now to the area right around 951, the beginning of this travel narrative. And there are some kind of distinctive features in here. And actually, what I think I'd like to even back up just a bit here. I'm trying to find something real quickly. Sorry for my silence.
While you're looking, Mark, I would just like to say that you should not confuse Q with Q Anonymous. They're two.
No, absolutely
Oh.
not.
Thank you.
Q, by the way, so let me talk about Q a little bit. So I'm actually a Q skeptic. I kind of don't believe that Q exists. Q is a hypothetical document. It comes from the German word Quelle, which means source. And so when they were imagining there must be another source, they just kind of used the German word source to say, well, there's this source. Initially, it was always considered to be kind of a vague, maybe oral collection. But in recent scholarship, people started to imagine it was a real document. In fact, a multiple, that there are levels of recension that had built on this. But we have never had we've never found Q. It's purely hypothetical, and I think that there are other ways of imagining it. Anyway, I'm not finding here real quickly what I went to, but right at the Transfiguration, the document at the Transfiguration. Oh, here it is. In the Transfiguration account. Let's go back to 9:30:31.
That's Mark 9:30.
In Luke's 9:30:31, there's kind of a distinctive feature that sets up this whole travel narrative. That is, when Moses and Elijah appear on the mountainside along with Jesus, who is now been transformed into this dazzling white color. It says in 31 that they appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was to accomplish at Jerusalem. And this word departure here is kind of interesting. He uses the word exodus, which is the Greek word for departure, but here it has resonance. It has echo for us with the Exodus in the book of Exodus. That is, Israelites moving from Egypt over to the Promised Land. And so this Exodus, this departure, which is going to take place in Jerusalem, we already have this kind of anticipation that this is the culminating event in Luke. So in all the Gospels, in fact, and Luke is more explicit in setting that up. So when we get to 9:51, then the beginning of the travel narrative, Luke again is very explicit and says, when the days drew near for him to be received up, to be taken up, he set his to Jerusalem. And this marks the beginning of this narrative structure. And what we'll see is that periodically in these 9 chapters in Luke, periodically the narrator comes in and says things like, and they were going to Jerusalem, or they continued on their way to Jerusalem. And so there's a series of notes that kind of remind us that we're still on the way to Jerusalem. It's a very distinctive attempt to kind of link all these things together. And we don't find that in the other Gospels at all. Now, what's absent in Luke's account, in all of this material, is any kind of comment about where Jesus is, that is geographical location, or when it is. Does this travel narrative take a week, a month, a year, 2 years? We don't know, because Luke never tells us. Now, that's actually fairly distinctive in all of this. Notice all these different events, and he's moving from place to place. I mean, we know that. He says he goes to a village, he goes to another village, goes to another place, but they don't tell us where that place is. Is it in Cana? Is it in Bethsaida? Has he moved down in some ways? The closest we get to a single location in this whole travel narrative is at the very beginning. It says he sent messengers ahead of him and went and entered a village of the Samaritans. Well, is that in Samaria? Maybe. So maybe he's already in Samaria, which is between Galilee and Judea. But then it seems later on that he's spending a lot of time like they're perhaps Galilean. Moreover, though, we don't know for sure that a village of Samaritans is in Samaria, because we know actually that Samaritans dwelled in a number of villages throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria. So the only even kind of quasi reference to where he is unusual in its ambiguity. So we have this kind of interesting travel narrative that is taken outside of the norm of discourse that would tell us where we're going and when we're going. Now I want to I'm going to kind of stop sharing here at this point. Let me now and look at a couple of other things in Luke that will highlight perhaps the distinctiveness of this. That is that Luke, of all the Gospels, seems to be attempting to portray his account as being very historical. If we go to the very beginning of his Gospel, for instance, that Luke, of all the Gospels, attempts to define in a way that ancient historians did. Look at 1:5, which is kind of our opening narrative structure in Luke. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah, etc. So we start by linking ourselves specifically to the time of Herod. That's kind of the way you chronologized issues in ancient histories. We go a little bit farther in the account. In chapter 2, as we approach the birth of Jesus. So now we're few months further. See, this gets even more specific. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar, the world should be enrolled. And this is the first enrollment when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be enrolled, and Joseph went to his own city of Nazareth. Notice again this kind of chronological linkage with external rulers. In this case, Caesar Augustus is the emperor in Rome, and his governor is Quirinius. Well, we've already heard about Herod. So now we have this kind of rather specific chronological linkage to that kind of event. If we go just a little bit further, and that is at the beginning now of the ministry of Jesus, after the birth narrative and after his event at 12 years old, in chapter 3, we have even a more pointed chronological linkage with the external world. That is, in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip, tetrarch of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis, Licinius, tetrarch of Abilene, the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John and Zechariah. Notice now he's being rather specific. He's linking this story, the events of this story, to the Roman governor, to the local Roman governorship here in Israel, to his vassal state ruler Herod Antipas in Galilee, and his brother Philip up in Iturea and Trachonitis, and even to the Jewish high priesthoods of Annas and Caiaphas. So we've got all these linkages as if to say, what we're doing is, what he's doing is being very careful in his historical construction. And this fits very closely with what he said he was going to do, and that is that his attempt in using some material from other gospels, together with cross-examining eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, was an attempt to accurately portray what actually happened. So this emphasis is on specificity, on accuracy. And we don't see that again in the other gospels. So when we get to the travel narrative, all of a sudden we lose that specificity. By the way, we gain it back again at the end of the travel narrative. All of a sudden we're into Jerusalem. It's Passover. We have the various high priests involved. Luke once again gains specificity, but in this travel narrative from 951 to 1820 or so, that Luke does exactly the opposite to what he's been doing with the gospel, which is being very careful, very attentive. So the question then is, what's going on? How is Luke? What kind of document is this central part? In others, do we have a genre shift? If we call the larger genre gospel history or historical biography or something like that, the travel narrative seems to not be the same kind of genre. It seems to be a departure from that careful historical nature. And that's partly.
Whoa. Mark's muted.
I just unmuted him. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
That was my fault. I clicked the wrong thing. I want to say we are at the 10-minute warning. We have 9.5 minutes, Mark.
Good. Well, I
Censored.
pretty much covered a lot of what I want to cover, and that is just to kind of raise the question about this genre. And so to me, that question that's going on is what is happening in this travel narrative? Is it a different genre? If so, what might it be? And why would Luke do this? Why would Luke all of a sudden open up this central section in this very distinctive way? that is so at odds with the rest of his gospel, its narrative construction. And then that, of course, then raises questions that hopefully maybe we could, if we carefully look at the way material is presented, especially the events, the grouping of events, maybe we're gonna kind of find out a little bit, and this is the nature of my investigation, to explore a bit about what Luke is doing and why he's presenting this. So that's it. I'd be open for any of your thoughts or questions or comments at this point about the distinctiveness of that, or ask me questions or raise your own thoughts, because this is pretty interesting, especially when we compare it to Mark and Matthew, and just kind of say, well,
Do you think, Mark, that in the prologue, when Luke says he wants to set forth an orderly account, that he's suggesting that Mark might not be orderly?
Yeah, I think there is a bit of that. I mean, I think that Luke is clearly raising some questions about either the orderliness or the completeness. Orderly doesn't necessarily mean, so here's another component of my question, is orderly always chronological order, or might it be thematic orderliness, or something like that? So we're not entirely sure what orderliness is, but I think there is implicit a little bit of a corrective or modification. I don't think we have to imagine him being super negative, because look at what he does. I mean, he essentially follows Mark incredibly closely. It might also be, Ted, that he's maybe more critical of Matthew's, because he actually departs more from Matthew. So if he had Matthew as a source, or if he had Q, which has no orderly structure that we can tell, if there was a Q, the way that we've reconstructed it, maybe part of this is his response. So there's a lot of possibilities. The prologue raises a bunch of questions about how we might approach this discourse, this study.
Mark?
Yeah.
Thoughts. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. You pointed out that several of the passages in in Mark that come earlier, Luke has placed into his travel narrative, right?
Yeah.
And are there any of those in Mark that are localized, but then when he puts them into the travel narrative, he omits the location?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I don't think I'd actually had looked at that. I need to look at it. I will.
It seems like if any of them were localized in Mark and then he removes the localization, it might strengthen your thesis.
Yeah. My quick hunch is that it's not. And that is that the kind of material that gets shifted is like, for instance, the divorce statement. And that's just a teaching. So it seems like sometimes there's just some teaching issues that aren't necessarily heavily dependent upon some location. What's more intriguing, perhaps, Barry, is the fact that a lot of the material in this travel narrative is material that in Matthew we find in the Sermon on the Mount, which is localized. I mean, although where that mount is, we don't know, but it seems to be kind of specific. And Luke actually breaks up, following, if he knew Matthew and is following it, that he actually moves it into some different locations. And we'll talk a little bit about that, because there seems to be, I think, some Lucan rationale for how they have been reassembled in the Luke travel narrative. John?
Of course, Jesus might have preached the same sermon and given the same body of teaching numerous times. So the fact that it's mentioned in one place would not mean he didn't do it somewhere else as well.
That's true. And the only problem with that, Ted, is that, we have to assume that we've got 30 or 40 years distance at least. And so the question would be, would people have remembered the same kind of event in different areas? This is kind of, as it's gathered in the social memory of the early church, would they not have kind of accumulated those together into the same memory? Would they have kept distinct memories as distinct issues? Possible.
It looks like that. Oh, I'm sorry. John, were you going to say something? John Banks?
Go ahead, Barry. I'd rather hear your words than my words. I think I'm trying to think this through.
Well, mine's just very small. I noticed that the teaching on divorce in Mark is localized.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, in Judea and Perea. It says he was in Judea and Perea.
Yeah.
So I assume that is not stated in Luke.
Right. No, it's not.
Yeah.
There's no location there. So.
Do we have any variations in the texts, the early text we have of Luke, that would indicate that this was not part of an original undertaking by Luke, or does this appear in? Okay.
Yeah. No, it is essential part of Luke, the way he's constructed it, and you can even see it in the kind of the ramp up that I was pointing out, where in the Transfiguration he's already getting ready for his exodus to Jerusalem. So by the time the travel narrative starts, it's already kind of been set up, and then he kind of we re-enter the Markan narrative as he approaches Jerusalem into Jericho, and all of a sudden we gain that specificity again.
Mark, there is one geographical reference in the travel narrative, and that's at 1711, where it's one of those, on the way to Jerusalem statements, one of those markers that we're still on the journey. He was in the region between Samaria and Galilee, and then we get the story.
Yeah.
Of the lepers. That's
again, it's really vague, isn't it?
Right, but he's still, for me, what's striking is he's on his way to Jerusalem, but he's still on the border of Galilee and Samaria. So, which points to the fact that this isn't a isn't a triptych. This isn't he's not following his GPS.
And he does not go through Samaria because he ends up in Jericho. You wouldn't, if you went through Samaria to get to Jerusalem, you wouldn't go all the way down to Jericho. But if you were avoiding Samaria, you would go around Samaria and end up in Jericho, and then have the uphill trek to Jerusalem from there.
Yeah, although Ted, you might.
All right, friends, we have less than a minute, so we're going to be cutting out real soon.
Ted, you might be traveling simply alongside the Jordan. Actually, Samaria goes all the way to the Jordan River, and so it's an instinct region. Notice, John, that this makes that intriguing, that opening statement about the fact that he was in villages of the Samaritans. If the opening thing is somehow with villages of Samaritans, which implied Samaria, then